What sounds like pseudoscience, but actually isn't. The effect on your dopamine receptors from fantasizing, or imagining things. I forget the exact term. As it turns out, you can achieve a pretty high dopamine response from fantasizing, or imagining, or talking about goals, which can provide your brain with enough happy chemicals to actually hinder your drive to go and achieve those things for real. This sounds like bullshit, but it's true. Some people essentially self-medicate their depression this way. It is called maladaptive daydreaming. You basically use daydreaming, like an addict uses heroin, giving yourself a dopamine rush by fantasizing having reached goals, or making yourself a hero. It can even interfere with your ability to form relationships, or complete daily tasks. When an amputee is experiencing phantom limb pains, massaging their stump, and then the space where the limb was, actually does help reduce the pains. Especially, if the person is already on the maximum dosage of pain meds, and can't have any more. Hearing the hands against the sheets, where the limb would be, tricks the brain into thinking that it's still there, so it stops the nerves from overfiring as much. There is a truly harrowing New Yorker article, called, "The Itch" by Atul Gawande, that gets into phantom limb pain, and how looking at a box of mirrors, that basically makes it seem like your regular limb is in the place of the missing one, actually decrease their pain. Patients had a sense that the phantom limb was still there, but ballooned to an extremely large size, and it would shrink to normal once they went through the mirror box. General TW on this article, it's actual nightmare fuel, but it's incredibly fascinating, and deeply well written. Ever heard of epigenetics? It sounds like pseudoscience, with its talk of genes being turned on and off by environmental factors, but it's a legit field of study. It's all about how lifestyle and environment can influence gene expression, without altering the DNA sequence itself. It can alter the DNA structure by methylation, as one example. DNA methylation is a type of epigenetic modification that involves adding a methyl group to DNA, which can turn genes off. The illusory truth effect. People will believe something just because it is repeated, even when they know that what's being said is not true. Used often in politics, specifically propaganda. Say it enough times, people will believe it. My therapist pointed this out once, and it has scared me ever since. I was talking to her about how nervous I was that my in-laws, terrible people, say awful lies about me to my husband, and it made me uncomfortable, despite both me and my husband knowing those things aren't true. I said something about how I wish I could just be more mature and brush it off, but it made me so nervous to know that dynamic was happening behind my back. That's when she explained the illusory truth effect to me, and it felt like a bunch of puzzle pieces fell into place. TLDR, be careful who you spend time around, because this applies to interpersonal relationships, not just weird conspiracy nut job shit on the internet, lol. You absorb more nutrients from cooked eggs than you do from raw eggs. People don't believe it, because cooking eggs actually does reduce the amount of nutrients. But cooking them changes the protein structures, and makes it easier for your body to actually absorb them. It's called protein denaturation, and it increases the bioavailability of the proteins. Bioavailability describes what is actually available for your body to digest and absorb. More nutrients doesn't necessarily mean more bioavailability, and less nutrients doesn't necessarily mean less bioavailability. Isn't this one of the theories behind why we were able to evolve to have large complex brains? Because we harnessed fire, so we were able to access more nutrients than we would have in just raw food. You are correct. Also, cooked meat is easier to digest than raw meat. From what I've read, it's the same for cooked grains, vegetables, legumes and tubers. Some nutrition is always lost via cooking, but the increased ease of digestion compensates for that. I believe the exception is fruits, especially citrus, where the raw value of vitamin C overshadows the cooked version. Trying to describe otolith/otoconia causing dizziness quickly in layman's terms sounds a lot like quackery. Especially when you start talking about the treatment being an all-natural set of exercises that will help you realign your inner crystals and regain balance. Yes, my dad had vertigo, and I felt like an idiot trying to explain to him that his ear crystals were out of whack. I gotta jump in here near the top and let people know that this only applies to benign paroxysmal positional vertigo. Vertigo can be a symptom of a lot of different conditions and disorders along the auditory pathway, including neurological ones. Meniere's and acoustic neuromas are two conditions that commonly involve vertigo or dizziness, and repositioning maneuvers will do absolutely nothing for them. Redheads need more anesthesia than non-redheads. Not sure if this fits the bill, but it's always been fascinating to me. Yep, in my medical chart it says, paradoxical response to anesthesia, intolerant of twilight redheaded. Waking up mid-surgery is not something anyone should experience. It's happened to me 3 times, so far. I woke up during a minor surgery, endoscopy, and they said, "Oh, we got a gagger," and got more medicine. For me, I didn't panic or anything, but I did start having an involuntary gagging reflex. When I finally got fully up, after the procedure, I told the nurse, and she said, "No you didn't." I was like, cool, then why can't I quote the conversation? Your experience was probably way worse. That talk about you changing personalities when switching languages apparently has truth to it. My wife is like this 100%. She born in Japan, but spent her early teens through 20s in America, learning the nuances of English. We live in Japan again now, and seeing her drop her directness and matter-of-fact Americanisms when switching to a Japanese interaction had me absolutely flabbergasted for the first few months. Still cracks me up when she hangs up so politely in Japanese and immediately goes, "Oh my god, that was so effing annoying. LOL." When I was living in Japan, and friends and relatives would come visit me, they said I had 2 personalities, depending on which language I was speaking, to the point that started calling me Japan Chris whenever I'd be using Japanese around them. They even said I would laugh differently when speaking Japanese compared to English. You tend to absorb culturalisms when learning another language, particularly if you are around native speakers, so my body language, tone, and even my laugh would apparently switch between languages. Anything to do with platypuses? Yeah, don't mind the egg-laying mammals with the face of a duck and the tail of a beaver that sweats milk and has toxic spurs on the back of his feet. It's not so much a pseudoscience as it is just good old-fashioned underfunding for research, but gut microbiome health is way more than just the health of one's gut. I was a scientist at a gut microbiome pharma company, and now I'm in the plant microbiome space. There's a lot of pseudoscience and or bad science in the gut microbiome area. Lots of wild claims from probiotic companies. We tested a bunch of probiotic products to try and get ideas for formulating live microbe drugs, and we found that many products didn't contain live active microbes, or orders of magnitude less live microbe than their minimum claim. We also found that the capsules didn't protect live microbes from stomach acid in simulated dissolution assays. And some just have wild claims without peer review for the health benefits. In pharma, gut microbiome drugs haven't been as successful as was hoped. There are some on the market now, but they aren't miracles drugs. I definitely don't think it's all pseudoscience, but I think a lot of it is poorly understood and over-embellished. Having blue eyes can make you prone to sneezing when exposed to bright light. Blue eyes also take in more light, so the world is legit brighter for blue-eyed folks. I have really pale blue eyes, almost silver, and my husband has brown, and he's always amused at how goddamn blind I am when I'm outside with him, and he can see fine. He's actually had to help me navigate to our car because I literally can't see. B.F. Skinner's air crib. In psychology, B.F. Skinner is considered the father of behaviorism, and he wrote a sci-fi book called Walden 2, which featured some of this. What he's less known for today, but was well known for back in his day, was his air crib for babies. It was basically a ventilated and climate-controlled box enclosed by plexiglass. It was padded, but similar to a doctor's chair with paper that rolls out and replaced with new paper. In this case, it was rolled out for hygiene, messes, etc. And parents who bought and used one for their kids loved it, because their kids were content and comfortable. But the masses and media thought it was crazy. They claimed Skinner was nuts, and the air crib was basically a terrarium for children. Skinner invented it because his research determined that the main reason babies become upset and cry, besides being hungry, is that they are uncomfortably too warm or too cold. His research showed that if a baby has a perfectly controlled environment and is comfortable, it won't keep waking up at night crying. And parents will get more sleep. Plus, since you didn't need blankets and sheets, nor did the baby need all sorts of clothing to wear, Parents didn't have to constantly do laundry. Again, critics ridiculed the air crib, claiming that it was a horrible Skinner box, which was a totally different thing he used for experiments. They even invented stories about babies dying, or growing up crazy, and that Skinner's own daughter ended up committing suicide, as a result of her being raised in an air crib. Which is funny, because Skinner's daughter would later claim that she was very healthy and alive and had no horrible memories of the air crib. Ultimately, the thing that's interesting about the air crib is that it's really just a technological upgrade from the very thing most Finns put their babies in. When a woman in Finland gives birth, they are literally handed a folded-up cardboard box, and when they get home, they unfold it, put a little padding at the bottom, and that's it. No fancy elaborate crib. A cardboard box. The Finns have one of the lowest infant mortality rates on the planet, 2.1 per 1,000 born. By comparison, the United States, Slovakia, United Arab Emirates, and Bosnia have nearly the exact same rate, around 5 to 5.1. You can't really buy an air crib anymore, because no company is willing to associate itself with the constant criticism of the device, regardless of how successful it was to numerous couples in the 1940s and 50s, but you can build one yourself. Duct tape occlusion therapy. Basically, you put duct tape on warts for a few weeks, and they just straight up disappear. It sounds like the modern version of an old wives' tale, but it's a hell of a lot less painful than other methods, and a roll of duct tape costs practically nothing, so there isn't really any reason not to give it a try. The pseudoscience part is that the research on it is limited. Not a lot of pharmaceutical companies are queuing up to research the medical efficacy of duct tape, but kind of promising. It boils down to 3 studies, all of which have pretty significant methodological issues. A 2002 study found that it had a high rate of efficacy, 85%, compared to 60% for cryotherapy, but it didn't have a control group, and it gathered responses via phone interviews after the fact. As studies go, it's not the best design. 2 later studies failed to repeat the results of the first study, which would be pretty damning with regards to the whole scientific method thing. But they tested it using clear duct tape, which uses a different kind of adhesive, rubber, to the standard gray, acrylic, tape. Why you'd test an entirely different type of tape is beyond me, but there you go. This has resulted in people suggesting that it might have something to do with the specific adhesive used, as though it stimulates some kind of reaction in the skin that causes the body to attack the wart itself. Additionally, one of the other follow-up studies was criticized pretty harshly in PR review for making statements it couldn't back up. Ultimately, it's just a big gap in our knowledge, but there's at least some scientific evidence for it working. That said, anecdotally I've found it works for me. I had a giant wart on the bottom of my foot for years, and within a few weeks of trying it out it was gone completely. The really weird thing is that I only treated the wart on the ball of my foot and not the heel, and both of them healed up pretty much at the same rate. So, there's a study that says it has a high rate of effectiveness, and I've personally found it to work, despite me thinking it sounds completely nonsensical before I tried it. But even now, it feels entirely made up to me. Neuroplasticity is pretty crazy. Our brains rewire themselves to use new tools, so we don't have to think as hard about using them. Picture writing your name, and think about how your arm, hand, and fingers all move together to draw the letters. All that incredibly complex movement we don't even think about, our brains just do it. We can use tools like they're an appendage. Some people even learn to use new appendages or senses. Like the third thumb thing from a while back, or the guy who plugged an antenna into his brain that lets him sense electromagnetic fields. The bacteria in your intestine exist to digest the foods you usually eat. If you stop eating those foods, the bacteria will die, so they send a message to your brain, causing you to crave those foods. If you're trying to give up French fries, for example, it will take about 4 weeks to kill all the bacteria accustomed to digesting that food, and you will continue to crave it while they live. It also may be possible to lose weight by getting a fecal transplant from a thin person. The only problem is, it is also possible to get a mental illness, potentially, from that same person, so they should be screened carefully. Mycelium. You're telling me the roots of mushrooms act as a big message delivery system that not only allows information to be sent large distances across a single specimen, but can also be used by connected trees to communicate with each other and swap nutrients? This is an oversimplification, and mycelium absolutely does not think, isn't sentient, like humans do. However, I am not exaggerating Just how implausible it all sounds. There are some amazing mushroom documentaries out there, and it still baffles me. Wrong word. You're looking for mycorrhiza. The really crazy part is, almost nobody knew about it a few years ago, yet it's been estimated to be symbiotic with 80% of all plants. The things they don't teach us in schools. I just learned recently that certain plants actually parasitize the mycorrhiza, such as Monotropa uniflora, aka ghost pipes, and because they steal their nutrients from the mycorrhiza, they don't need chlorophyll, and thus aren't green. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. EMDR. Essentially, you look at a moving light or object in the therapy room, as you process painful memories, as in PTSD, and related trauma disorders. It's very effective for most people, and typically works faster than traditional therapeutic models. Sometimes, the relief is apparent, even after one session. It's broadly applied to PTSD, anxiety disorders, phobia, dissociative disorders. EMDR is indicated for a wide variety of life challenges. Privately, I call it the little miracle. There are times when it appears to be almost mystical, but then, the human mind is vast and endless, and we know very little about it. EMDR turned traumatic memories, from feeling like they happened yesterday, to feeling like they happened decades ago, when they actually happened. EMDR is the reason I still go for walks to think. It gets your brain hemispheres communicating. Visualizing and mirror neurons. Research has showed that visualizing is actually incredibly powerful. It activates both motor neurons and mirror neurons. Watching someone do a squat with good form, and visualizing yourself executing that same motion with good form, are almost the same to your brain as physically doing it. So, if you're working out, learning a dance, etc., watch videos of other people doing it. Close your eyes, and visualize yourself doing it, moving through the motion, and then when you go to do it, it will be easier. Transcranial magnetic stimulation for depression. I told my doctor it sounded like pseudoscience once, a long time ago, but I later found out that it really is a legit thing. I haven't actually done it myself, though, and I've heard personal reviews on both ends of the spectrum. My sister had it. The goal was to reduce her depression and anxiety, to help reduce the symptoms of schizophrenia. It worked. It's not a cure, but her auditory and visual hallucinations dropped, and were easier for her to manage. People getting PhDs to study fossilized feces, aka coprolites. First time I heard about it, I thought it was a joke. After all, isn't a fossil organic material that's been replaced by minerals, so what good will it do to study the size and shape of stone turds? Nope, it's an actual respected field of physical anthropology that's contributed a great deal of knowledge to prehistory. The double-slit experiment, where one particle, seemingly, is in two places at the same time. One of the most profound experiments in all history, and an experiment that is pretty easily done and has been repeated many, many times, because it is unbelievable. If it doesn't disturb you, on some level, you are probably not understanding it. Hippies will try and tell you that you need to do LSD, or mushrooms, to open your mind, or heal yourself, but psychedelics, under an experienced guide, are somewhere around 66% effective at curing PTSD in veterans on the first experience. Additionally, psychedelics are amazingly effective, more than 50%, at treating alcoholism, nicotine addiction, and other antipsychotic disorders, think anxiety, depression. I don't think this sounds like BS, but a lot of people I've explained it to, look like they doubt me. Phantom pain, due to physical opioid addiction. Basically, if you actually injure your back and start taking opioids, your body learns that sending pain signals gets you to take opiates. Your body becomes physically and or mentally dependent on the opiates, and so continues sending pain signals, long after the injury has healed. I was in a car accident and had to take opiates to sleep, because my back would hurt, after lying down for more than 4 or 5 hours. I also didn't realize, the doctor my lawyer had referred me to, was more or less a pill mill, so, when I kept going in, and saying, I was still in pain, she just kept writing scripts. This is also decades ago, when they were a lot more liberal with them. I tried cutting down to half as much, and my back would wake up killing me worse than it had in months. It wasn't until I did some research on my own, and found out about this, that I was able to get off of them. You basically just have to tough it out for a week or two. It took 10 days, and my back was angry, but I've never had pain, like I did from the accident again. I was probably on pain pills for at least a year longer than I needed to be. With all of the talk of the opioid crisis, I can't believe this isn't discussed more. I'm no expert, but this is based on my first-hand experience. Taking vitamin D supplements makes me feel significantly less depressed. Like, I have the potential to be normal if I've consistently taken it. And if I haven't, I will definitely be depressed, even if everything else is going great. Now, vitamins aren't exactly pseudoscience. They are, in fact, actual science. But I had a hard time taking certain people seriously about them. But damned if it doesn't make a demonstrative difference in my life. Most of psychology and neurology sound like absolute bullshit once you read into it first, and then there's just this disgusting mountain of evidence in your face. Like, just look at ADHD. For an ADHD person, the reason they didn't do something can quite literally be, my brain didn't let me do it, and it's not BS, like, it's a thing called executive dysfunction, which is the brain not know what, or how to do something, or start, or a lot of other things, and then just doesn't. In the outside observer, it looks like laziness, and that they're just slacking off scrolling their phone, or watching stuff, but inside is an entire monologue of said person screaming at themselves to just do the thing, but they can't. It's also not just for important or menial tasks. They'll procrastinate on things they want to do, like playing a video game, or reading a good book. It can often feel like locked-in syndrome, a condition where you're locked inside your own body as an observer. Not exactly what the thread is asking about, but a story that just happened. My wife and I were watching some Netflix true crime show. Some guy is on the run from the police, and the police find a bag he stashed. All the electronics were wrapped in tin foil. We laugh at it like, haha, tin foil, conspiracy nut. My wife asks, would that even do anything? I'm like, no. Well, I guess it might make a Faraday cage to block signals. But there's no way it does anything. Does it? I grab some tin foil, wrap my phone up, and yup, her phone calls were no longer coming through. So, that's my answer. Wrapping your electronics in tin foil sounds like pseudoscience, but it does stop them from wireless connections. Seeing with your tongue is possible by wearing a special helmet with a camera and an electric plate on your tongue that transmits low-voltage signals via the plate. The brain will interpret that information through the visual cortex. The technique has also been used to help people with a malfunctioning cerebellum by helping them restore their balance. That cosmic rays, neutrinos, are responsible for a lot of random computer errors. The smaller components are, and the less electricity they need, makes them more susceptible to interference. They carry very little electrical charge, but enough to flip zeros to ones. The wrong flip, and oops, not working correctly. Temporarily. This is why turning things off and on again fixes so many issues. If you hold a pencil between your teeth, forcing your mouth into a grin-like shape, it will make you evaluate your mood more positively. Your brain responds to body movements and postures, and this way, you can trick the brain into thinking you've been smiling all day.